Here's what's coming today on the Woodworking Network podcast.
When you see one kid turn his or her life around and end up being a productive member of the community in whatever shape that takes, that's pretty amazing.
Welcome to this episode of the Woodworking Network podcast. Join us as we explore the business of woodworking, big and small, and what it takes to succeed. I'm Will Sampson. Today's episode is sponsored by the Executive Briefing Conference. Today our guest is Jim Bouchard, founder of the Sensei Leader Movement and keynote speaker for the upcoming Executive Briefing Conference presented by Woodworking Network. But first, I want to talk about the need for networking. Networking comes easy for me. If I have a question that I can't answer, I pick up the phone or dash off an email to someone I think might know the answer or might know somebody who knows the answer. I revere and collect knowledgeable friends and acquaintances who get used to me sending a random call or text their way to answer a question or two. That all seems normal to me. But I know it isn't natural for everyone, particularly in smaller woodworking shops. Too many people, shop owners especially, must think they need to discover or recreate all the answers to the questions of life and business themselves. They rarely take advantage of powerful, low or no-cost tools that are available to find those answers through networking. For example, I love trade shows, even if I'm not buying or selling anything. I always meet new people willing to share their knowledge, and I always learn new things, sometimes things that I realize aren't actually new, and I probably should have known before, but I didn't. If someone as connected and loving of networking as I am is often surprised by rediscovered knowledge, what must it be like for those folks struggling in isolation in their shops? Networking can take all sorts of forms. The easiest networking is to join associations, clubs, and other organizations that allow you to meet new people, share information, and build your network. That includes trade associations like the Cabinet Makers Association, service clubs like Rotary and Lions, business groups like your local Chamber of Commerce, and even a local woodworking guild that caters mostly to hobbyists. There are online networking opportunities like LinkedIn and Facebook. Keep an eye out for friends of friends you can connect with to build your network. Networking can also mean looking out for events like conferences and promotional demonstrations that could be opportunities to learn more and meet more people. Woodworking Network hosts a number of events every year in the U.S. and Canada, and we actively participate in the IWF and AWFS shows with special symposia and educational programs. One of the really great high-level networking opportunities is the Executive Briefing Conference that will be held in Colorado Springs, September 15th through 17th this year. Not everyone can have top industry executives on speed dial to answer questions, but you can come to Colorado to enjoy an information-packed event that gives you tremendous opportunities to meet with those executives face-to-face. As a lifelong journalist, I'm used to approaching people I don't know and asking questions. The more you do it, the more comfortable it gets. The real problem is getting access to the right people at the right time. Building a network of your own is crucial to keep you from having to reinvent the wheel over and over again. On that note, I want to get to our interview with Jim Bouchard. But first, let's pause for a word from our sponsor. It's really easy for woodworkers to stay stuck inside, focused on their shops and production. But over the last couple of years, the pandemic has forced them to be even more isolated than usual. And it's even harder if what you want is to network with the top-level executives in the industry. Where and how can you do it? The answer is the Executive Briefing Conference coming this September at the spectacular Broadmoor in Colorado Springs. This is an unparalleled opportunity to boost your business with intelligence on techniques, tools, and technology, and to feed on inspiration from real leaders in the industry, not to mention take in all the high-altitude hospitality, beauty, and recreation offered by the Broadmoor. Learn more at executivebriefingconference.com. See you there. Now let's get to our interview with Jim Bouchard. Today, our guest is Jim Bouchard, founder of the Sensei Leader Movement and keynote speaker for the upcoming Executive Briefing Conference presented by Woodworking Network. Welcome back to the Woodworking Network podcast, Jim.
Well, it might be cliche to say it's always an honor, but it's not a cliche if it's sincere, is it?
Well, I'm always glad to talk with you. I always find it fascinating. You and I have been talking a lot lately about the employment challenges facing manufacturers in today's market. Everybody tells me they can't find good help. Mm-hmm. And we hear lots of suggestions that are really management suggestions, like raising pay and offering sign-on bonuses and that sort of thing. But I wanted to talk to you less about management and more about leadership. How can effective leadership address the hiring challenge?
Yeah, it's interesting that in the last few months, wages have really become heavily commoditized, especially at the frontline levels, right? I mean, who doesn't have a sign up that says something to the effect of $15, $20 an hour plus sign up bonus, plus this, plus that. And that works to a degree, and it attracts people that are motivated by that particular need at the time, right? But when we're trying to build, as so many of the folks I've met in the Woodworking Network, not trying to, you have built tremendous cultures, sustainable cultures. Then who do we want to attract, and how do we want to do it? And I think the companies that I'm seeing that are really succeeding in this, that are rising above the competition, are those that really differentiate themselves by a higher calling. That give them purpose rather than a reason, if that makes sense, right? Reason appeals to the mind, a purpose appeals to the heart. So when you I think you and I were talking about this the other day, right? The Old Town Canoe Company, I was watching a video tour of their facility, and they said that you can't get a job there right now, which is pretty unusual in this market.
Absolutely.
Here, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And part of the thing was that they have second and third generation boat builders there. And they were driven by the fact that they were building what they felt were the absolute best boats on the planet. And that's really what keeps people. That's what helps people, inspires people to do their very, very best, to exceed expectations. Not that the other things aren't important. I mean, you still have to pay people a fair wage. You still have to give them, insurance, incentives, whatever the case may be, whatever the market dictates. But above and beyond that, again, appeal. It sounds soft, but I hate it when people lump it in the soft skills. It's not at all. When you appeal to somebody's heart, you're really appealing to to what's most important to them, right? And it's, money's a part of it for all of us. Sure, let's not be naive about it. But when we can appeal to the heart and appeal to that higher purpose, and we're connected to something bigger than any of us as individuals, that seems to be the path to success these days, especially in this competitive environment, right?
Oh, absolutely. And while I say that everybody says they can't find enough workers, it is true that there are some companies that have lists of folks that want to come and work for them, and they have to turn away qualified applicants. And those companies have become highly attractive to good workers, often with a reputation that goes beyond their region and into this industry as a whole. I call them magnet businesses. Do you think it's worthwhile for companies to try to become magnets to solve their hiring issues?
Worthwhile. I think it's essential. I mean, who's going to survive? We're not certain about what's going to happen over the next few months, the next couple of years. I mean, there's a lot of uncertainty that I'm hearing from experts about the economy and about supply chain issues and other things. And if anything, the world's becoming a little bit more volatile place, right? And we've seen, not just through COVID, but also with this situation in Russia, the situation we're experiencing with China, we were talking about just before we got on. We don't know. We're very dependent on these other parts of the world for the goods and the materials we need, right, to produce what we do here. Very seldom are we building things from scratch, right? That every molecule that goes into a product comes from the United States. That's almost unheard of anymore. So we've got to be prepared for that. So in that kind of environment, I mean, who's going to get you through the tough times? It's your people, right? And any organization, we lose sight of this sometimes, and it can almost sound trite, but if you really think about it, and I think we do need to think about it from time to time, any organization, I don't care how technical it is or or how heavily industrialized it is, your organization is still your people. That's it, right? You need people to run that process. You need people to plan, to strategize. You need people to keep things going. You need people to learn and grow and anticipate changes in the marketplace. And without that, it falls apart. So no, the emphasis, it's essential. People need to, leaders particularly, need to start paying attention to this if they're not already. And if they are, and I think we've talked about this in the past too, the best leaders are those who, they never pat themselves on the back and say, we've got it, right? We built the culture, that's it. It's how do we continue to learn, to grow, to develop, to transform ourselves, transform our organizations. If you're not leading with change, you're certainly dying, especially today in this market. So yeah, no, we've got to, I say this no matter what time you ask me these questions, right? But we've got to focus and refocus on the importance of connecting with our people and making sure that we're engaging them.
I was reading just this morning in Wall Street Journal a fascinating story about a company that's in our industry that's gone way beyond what most people do to attract top employees, and that's Pella, which is a closely held window company based in Pella, Iowa. And Pella, Iowa is a pretty small town, 10 or 15,000 people. And so how does a company like that attract people to that town? And they've actually invested tens of millions of dollars into improving the town. They've invested in restaurants and childcare facilities and home building projects so that their people have a place to live and don't have to commute from Des Moines or something like that. It's kind of fascinating. Now, of course, they're a $1 billion company, so they can afford to do things like that. But I'm thinking that community boosting efforts, even on a small scale with a smaller company, could be beneficial to raise the profile of a company and make it more of a magnet company. What do you think about that sort of thing?
No, in fact, you used the very word that I was thinking about as you were sharing that story. And I would say, that's absolutely the type of organization we should all be learning from and modeling ourselves after, because it's just scale, right? Whatever resources you have. And it's interesting because a lot of times in leadership development, the only way really to develop strong leaders is to test them under fire. You've got to give them conditions where they can perform as leaders, right? And even the smallest companies, sometimes you got to mitigate the risk. They don't want to throw people in the fire and whatnot. But we often point to community involvement as a place where leaders can gain experience with little or no risk to the organization. It's all upside benefit, isn't it? The aspiring leader is gaining experience, real leadership experience, because one of the toughest leadership challenges is to lead in a volunteer environment, right? Because you don't have the accountability and whatnot. And at the same time, the community sees that organization as contributing, not just talking about it and not just donating money, but actually supporting their people to give time, right? And real human effort to help in that community. And I think that goes a long way. And again, here in Maine, we're blessed. There's an organization, Unum, right? An insurance company that is probably one of the best in the world at that. And they're very quiet about it. They don't market it very often, but their community outreach program, one of my dearest friends is one of the VPs of community outreach. It's just unbelievable. They pay their people to go out and serve on boards, to serve in volunteer capacities. In fact, I believe it's a requirement that all their employees do some sort of community involvement as part of their regular work schedule. So yeah, those are the types of things. And that means a lot, doesn't it? Because you don't want to be that evil corporate entity on the hill, right?
Oh, yeah.
Well,
I'm always amazed that so many woodworking businesses don't get involved with, like local school programs to help develop new workers and interest in manufacturing. They don't do volunteer work. I know you do volunteer work with incarcerated youth, trying to help them get back into productive roles in the community. What benefit do you see for that kind of an effort?
Well, a lot of that's a payback for me because of my past experiences. A lot of what shaped me was transforming myself from someone who would likely have ended up in prison or dead, to somebody who hopefully is contributing. And So to me, it's payback, right? And the benefit for me is a constant reminder of where I came from, for one thing. And just the idea that if we can help, some people, you can't help everybody. And we'll probably touch on this as far as attracting employees and keeping them too. There's only so much you can do, right? You have to manage your expectations. But having said that, when you see, for instance, in that work, when you see one kid turn his or her life around and end up being a productive member of the community in whatever shape that takes, that's pretty amazing. That's a person who, in Maine here, it costs us about $85,000 a year, if you want to just put it in financial terms, to keep a kid in jail, right?
Right.
And I often joke with you, because some of these kids are just brilliant. I said, it would be cheaper for us to send you to Bowdoin College. And if you're not from the area, Bowdoin College is one of the most expensive schools in the country and one of the most elite, right? But that's the thing. How do you impact the lives of the people around you? Now, if you're doing that as an organization in your community, just think about the message that sends. And it doesn't have to be blaring trumpets, right? It's not something you have to necessarily advertise or market or promote. That word gets around and people recognize you as part of the community. Again, not just a corporate entity isolated away from the community and you only hear from when there's trouble. So yeah, there it is. It's not a matter of whether you should be doing it or it's just a matter of how, right? How are you going to get involved? How are you comfortable? Because you've got to weigh that, depending on the size of your organization, the resources you have, but there's always a way to contribute. Always. The woodworking thing, it reminds me, at the last EBC, I was so fascinated by the folks who had created that program, The Mill, right?
Right.
And how they were reaching out. I thought that is a beautiful program. I'd love to see more of that here in the Northeast. That's a great example. I hope they're there again this year. That's a great example about how to get involved in the community. And not that they were doing it from a self-serving perspective. I didn't get that at all. Their efforts were really sincere. They really wanted to help, right? But they talked about how that benefits the industry and organizations that participate in that, from the vendors, right, that are leasing the equipment to them, to the folks that are teaching there, everything. I think that's where your next generation of woodworkers is coming from. If you can get kids involved, and I know they service adults as well, but to get kids involved in these trades and so they see how creative and how exciting they are firsthand. It's one thing if someone comes to the school job fair and talks to you about how great it is to build quality cabinets, right? Quite another when they're in there and their hands are on it, right? And they get to experience that. And again, we're talking about touching the heart instead of the head, aren't we?
Right, right.
Because if you go to a lecture, and it's all good. I mean, you need to do these things, but quite different when someone just comes and visits the school assembly. We've all been there, right? And just talks about how great it is to be in the woodworking industry. But man, when you get people in there and they're rolling up their sleeves and feeling it, that's the key, right? That's when you're appealing to the heart, which is a much stronger appeal. We're not rational creatures, human beings. I mean, the science is pretty solid behind that, right? We're not rational creatures by and large. We're emotional creatures. So more ways we can touch the heart, the stronger and the more profitable. There's a lot of data to support that these days. I won't bore you with all of that, but it's out there. The companies that do this, the organizations that do this, do see a huge difference. I remember one author quoted it and documented it very well. Organizations that do the types of things we're talking about can outperform their competition by 700% or more. And that's a pretty significant number.
Yeah, I think so many people are focused on, what I would call technological leadership these days, creating the next amazing new widget or industry disrupting business concept or something like that. But the kind of leadership that you're focusing on is more fundamental and focused on these people issues. I've heard you describe it as human-centered leadership.
Human-centric, yeah. Well, where does it come from? I mean, it's the people that are coming up with those ideas, right? So it always freaks me out a little bit when someone loses sight of that and focuses on, for lack of a better way to describe it, focuses more on the output results, you see, which are important. Don't get me wrong. But we have to constantly look back. In fact, it just happened in the tech world. I just saw that there's a productivity issue coming up. With the way the economy's going and some of the bigger companies the parent companies of Facebook and Google were highlighted in this article. And they're focusing on productivity. They said the slackers are going to be gone soon, and they're really walking out there and saying, "Hey, people, you got to get your stuff together." That command and that authoritarian slip you and I have talked about, right?
Right.
And when I was reading that, I thought, it's interesting that it's happening in that particular industry that's noted for huge leaps, right? Technologically as well as socially. It struck me that, I'll have to dig deeper to see if they are or not doing it, but it struck me that article didn't point out that someone would walk out there and say, "Hey, look, we've got challenges ahead of us. Here's what we're facing. What do you guys think we should do?" And solicit the ideas, right? Rather than just coming out with the tried and not true failed method, right, from the past. All right, productivity's down. Strap it up. Let's go. Not that that's always a bad thing to say, but you know what I mean?
It's the old slogan, you manage what you measure. But again, that's the difference between management and leadership.
Yeah.
Leadership is trying to point people in a direction and not necessarily specify the way they get there.
Well, I always ask this question, what would inspire you to perform better? A hand say, "Hey, this is what's going on. I need your ideas. I need your help. Let's see what we can do to get through this," or coming out with the baseball bat, right? And right now, where there's so many choices for people to go, you show them the bat, I think they're going somewhere else.
Yeah, that's another thing that I wanted to talk about. We've been talking about hiring, but it's also about keeping employees. There's been lots of coverage of the so-called great resignation of people, and everybody, the numbers of people leaving are just going up and up.
Yeah.
What can leaders do to keep their best employees?
Love them. And it's interesting. We just did this workshop. It's interesting because let me define exactly what I mean by that word too. Gallup has done this poll over and over and over again. What do people want from their leaders? Compassion, trust, hope. Those are three of the big ones that always show up, right? And compassion always falls into the top three. It's usually right at the top. But what does that mean? It means, genuine caring, genuine empathy. Doesn't mean it doesn't mean you're just bending to everyone's will. That's where it gets confused sometimes, right? We're going to try to address every minor difference that people might have or every concern they might. You can't do that. It's impossible. But when you show a sincere, genuine interest, true empathy, and you demonstrate that walking the walk day after day after day with people, then they see and respond to that. And again, that's been proven. So when I say love, respect, wisdom, those are three things leaders need to give unconditionally. Now, there's where the argument usually starts. And we just had an interesting argument about that in a workshop a couple of weeks ago, where someone debated that. Now, that's cool. I like that because that's how we get these ideas, moving around. But the concern was you don't have to love everyone. I said, that's not what I'm saying. I said, when you love unconditionally as a leader. When you make that gesture, you're going to offer some expression of compassion. Then don't expect a direct return. It's not going to happen that way usually, right? Same thing with respect, same thing with wisdom. But leaders are supposed to go first. When we share first, then the probability of return is much, much higher. And what's interesting, and this has puzzled psychologists and philosophers for eons now, right? Let's take respect, for example. If I show respect to the people I serve, does it necessarily mean they're going to respect me in kind? No, right? No. And again, that's why I say share unconditionally. But if you show disrespect to that group, you almost guaranteed that comes back in kind, you see? And so those are the things we have to consider. And these are important. They're fundamental human considerations that get lost in the shuffle sometimes, especially if there's urgency or chaos, right? So it's tough.
Yeah, no question about that. Now, in addition to your keynote at EBC, I know you're going to be doing a leadership workshop. What can participants expect from that? What can you give a little idea of that so that folks that haven't attended one of your workshops before can see what they might be getting out of it?
Oh, sure. Yeah. And it's interesting because it looks likely that the current conditions we're seeing are going to continue and probably worsen by the time September comes around. So we'll be addressing that idea of the Great Resignation, how to attract, how to engage. You are key words. It's on the slide behind me, I'm sure. Inspire, empower, and guide people to their very best. That's how you keep people. Again, simple, not easy. We have to take these ideas and we have to make them very tangible. And that's what we do in a workshop. It's nice to say, for instance, you got to get out there and inspire people, meaning touching their hearts more than their heads. But how do you do it? And I'll give you a quick example. This was a beautiful example. There was a credit union a few years ago that was consistently picked in their state, one of the best places to work, right? Picked by their employees, one of the best places to work. And one tremendous and powerful expression of inspiration and compassion that they practiced all the time was that in the wintertime, when there was an ice storm or a bad snowstorm, the executives went out and cleared the windshields for everybody that was working there that day. Simple, isn't it? A very simple gesture, and most people would throw it away. It doesn't mean anything. That's the one that those people cited over and over and over again. And anybody who lives in cold climates, it's not pleasant to leave a warm office, and go out and clear your windshield at the end of the day. So, that's the type of thing. People look too much for the grandiose sometimes. And the most inspiring, thing you can offer to anybody is your own example. I always say this a lot. People say, well, how do you get people to be enthusiastic? I said, be enthusiastic. Now, again, it's terribly simple. There's my martial arts life talking, right? One of my masters. How do you kick better? He said, kick, right? It's true. The hard part is the discipline of it, the practice, and then looking in the mirror and asking yourself, I'm always cautious when someone starts the story, oh, I'm a very compassionate person. I do, all right, let's dig in. Let's see, how are you doing it? And how do you know you're doing it? And how do you know your people appreciate it or even notice it? That's where it can get very technical. So in a workshop, we roll up our sleeves and we come out of there, and you got to come out of there with one or two very tangible action steps that you're going to put into practice, and you're going to stick with it. So we also talk about that. One thing I'd like to offer too, though, we got to be careful. I don't want to feel like I'm letting people off the hook, so to speak, when I say this. But I've also dealt with enough people in the last few months that are really disturbed by the fact that they're trying so hard and still not holding on to everybody, right? And especially the younger generations, the newest two generations that are in the market right now. Some of them are leaving just because that's the culture of that generation. They don't want to stay in one place very long. You're lucky if you get a year and a half out of them, right? And they leave happy. They're not upset. There's that, I shouldn't say it's a cliche because it's very well documented, but over the past few years, one of the big issues in leadership was people don't leave companies, they leave leaders, right? They leave the managers. And that is true to a degree. That's the first thing we should look at. We should look in the mirror first, right? But we're also seeing that people are just leaving because they're just interested in trying other things, or they want to live somewhere.
They want to move faster than the
current
position
is there.
Allows.
Yep. So, that's again where we refocus on that human-centric connection. What can I do for this person now? And that will in turn usually make them more productive, right? More creative, better contributor to the organization while they're there. You can't always do anything about them leaving. So you want to analyze, make sure that you're not losing people because we're being careless or we're not, caring for them. But on the other hand, we also have to say, hey, these people are going to move along. And I've seen it in the woodworking network. I've also seen it in the credit unions. We do a lot of work in that space, healthcare. But a few people at the Closets Conference, there was a few people saying this. They worked at company A. They wanted to be somewhere else. They worked over there, but now they've got a network. You see, They didn't lose connection with people. Now you've got collaborations. Sometimes, and there were some young people there, particularly I was inspired by, because anyone looking at it from the outside without meeting these people would have said, well, they're competitors, direct competitors. But see, they didn't see it that way. Each of them had moved from one company to the other, and now they're working together. So they're still competitors, but they're collaborating. We like to call it cooperation, right? And how much stronger does that make the industry in a particular area? I say this almost every presentation. Sometimes people freak out about it. I think the only real significant measurement of your success as a leader is the success of your people. If your people aren't producing, then it's on you, no matter which way you look at it. You know, their success, but I love how General Patton said it. He said it in the form of a general, but he said, you know, the best general gives credit even when it's not deserved and takes the blame even if it's not his own fault, you see. And so those are the things you think about. What was that book? Was it Simon Sinek, Leaders Eat Last? Very interesting perspective, isn't it?
Yeah.
Are you placing yourself ahead of your people or with them or among them? Right. And that's a huge consideration. And that strikes at the heart of what and all of it has to do, right, with lines of communication too, doesn't it? Having that conversation, which is something we dig into in workshops quite often, especially those difficult conversations. You know, I'm sorry, you know, your work isn't what we need it to be. Can we address that? So on and so forth, how to have those conversations. Or, you know, you're the office jerk. And I'm making light of that, but that can be very serious at times,
right?
Especially with these ideas of racism in the workplace or sexual harassment and things like that. Those are difficult conversations, but they need to happen. As leaders, we can't abdicate that responsibility. But caring, compassionate leaders feel it the most, don't they? I mean,
oh, absolutely. Well, I'm looking forward to hearing more of what you have to say in Colorado. And I hope we get a great crowd of folks coming to the workshops and, you know, enjoying what's going on in the Broadmoor. It should be really exciting.
If it's anything like the last time, I can't tell you how much I appreciate your group and your community. Just a fabulous group of people. And the only thing I'd add is please come. I don't do keynote presentations. I do a keynote conversation, if you want to call it that, right?
Yep.
Let's bring your ideas, bring your experience, bring your wisdom. I'm just going to facilitate a good discussion, and let's share. That's how we'll learn and grow as leaders, right?
On that note, that's great. And we will see you in Colorado.
Thanks so much.
That's it for today. If you want to meet Jim Bouchard in person, be sure to attend the Executive Briefing Conference in Colorado Springs, September 15th through 17th. If you're looking for more of our podcasts, you can find all of them at woodworkingnetwork.com/podcasts and in popular podcast channels. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. Thanks again to today's sponsor, the Executive Briefing Conference. Go to executivebriefingconference.com. If you have a comment or topic you'd like us to explore, contact me at will.sampson@woodworkingnetwork.com. Thanks for listening.